only if you have a very direct and open relationship with somebody can you really give them feedback so that it's received well. Because any boss can yell at somebody else and say you didn't reach your quota or you didn't ship good code, but for that feedback to be received in a productive way so that they improve their performance, there must be a level of trust. And trust you get by being open, vulnerable, engaging, caring about your employees. So my experience is that you must see the human in every interaction and respect the human. And then the task is a separate thing.
I have a deep and abiding connection to the open source and free software movements. Have you ever wanted to know how you create a business that can become so core to the infrastructure of the world that it's absolutely synonymous? You may not know it, but you're using open source software right now in hundreds of ways. I personally have tried to convince many executives, founders, leaders, investors that open source is the future, and a lot of them don't get it. Today I have the pleasure of speaking with Marten Mickos, a seasoned CEO with an extraordinary track record in building and leading companies that challenge the status quo. If you've ever spun up a MySQL database, you've benefited from his work. Marten was the CEO who scaled MySQL into a global phenomenon, ultimately leading to its acquisition by Sun Microsystems for $1 billion. He's been the CEO of several other startups, including HackerOne, the groundbreaking cybersecurity platform that turned ethical hacking into an essential security practice for some of the world's biggest companies. This is truly a behind-the-scenes conversation. We dive into the art of building strong, rebellious companies that redefine entire industries. You'll hear how MySQL's shift to open source actually happened, and the counterintuitive truth that giving it away for free led to widespread adoption and ultimately reshaped the database market to their tremendous benefit. What's interesting about Marten is he is not the founder of these companies. He calls himself a hired CEO with founder mode. He's built companies with deeply committed teams, hiring for belief and passion over credentials, a strategy that turns skeptics into true believers, and of course is why they've had such lasting impact. One of the most fascinating moments in our conversation is when he recounts how MySQL chose to take money from a company it fundamentally disagreed with. If you've been around technology, you'll remember this controversy. Something that led to a firestorm of criticism, but ultimately strengthened their mission. And if you think building an open source business was bold, wait till you hear how he convinced government agencies and Fortune 500 companies to open their doors and invite hackers inside. This episode is packed with insights on leadership, category creation, and why running toward the fire, not away from it, is the key to building enduring companies. If you're a founder, a builder, or just someone who wants to know how to challenge conventional thinking, you're not going to want to miss this one. Here's my conversation with Marten Mickos. Marten, thank you for coming on. Really appreciate taking the time.
Thanks for inviting me, Eric.
I want to start by telling you a story, if you don't mind.
Please, yes.
Here's the first time I ever used MySQL.
Ooh.
Okay, it was 1999.
Yeah.
I was the dot-com bubble. I was doing my very first tech startup, and I was the CTO.
323.
Is that you know it well? And I actually went out and bought a computer to run my server on. Obviously, I installed Linux on it myself, and I was like, "Oh, I need a database." Now everyone knows that the best database for a business is Oracle. So of course, I went to download Oracle, from their website, run it on Linux. And the next 2-3 days of my life, and people today can't even imagine this. It wasn't like I was trying to figure out how to use Oracle. I was just trying to install it and get it to run at all. I couldn't do it. I felt incredibly stupid. I hired an Oracle DBA to help me. And we spent several days trying to get it to work. And after a while, I just thought, what am I doing with my life? This is ridiculous. I threw it away. I went to download MySQL, the M in the LAMP stack. And 15 minutes later, I was running my application on a database. And I was like, I'm never going back. This is the most incredible thing. And I just like that moment actually changed my life. Like that made it possible, not only for me to build that startup and that application, but like it really changed my view about what was possible with open source software and just with being a builder in general. Anyway, I thought you'd enjoy that story. I appreciate all these years later. I appreciate it.
You're speaking to me like Mark Zuckerberg. I visited him in 2003 or something when did they start Facebook? Just when they had started Facebook. So I visited him, and then as we were chatting there, I said, "Hey, Mark, tell me, why did you choose MySQL as the database for Facebook? And he looked at me completely perplexed, as if I'm stupid. He said, Martin, I grew up on MySQL.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
Exactly.
yeah.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
it
You
wasn't called a
know,
lamp stack in 1999.
no, I guess that's
You're
right. That term
retrofitting,
hadn't even been invented yet.
yeah.
Yeah.
There was a German developer in 2002, maybe, something like that, who came up with the word lamp stack. Anyhow, wonderful times.
This episode is brought to you by my friends at Wilson Sonsini, the Innovation Economies law firm. From the earliest days of the semiconductor industry to today's fast-advancing AI sector, not to mention healthcare and life sciences, Wilson Sonsini has represented the pioneers behind nearly every technology breakthrough. Based in Silicon Valley, Wilson Sonsini is connected to the top minds and institutions that inspire discovery and innovation, with strong ties to leading venture capital firms and investors in key markets, from Silicon Valley to New York and London and beyond. In fact, Wilson Sonsini is consistently top-ranked for the number of venture financings it handles each year. For more information, visit ecbc.wsgr.com. This episode is brought to you by Gusto. I'm a huge fan of Gusto. I've used the product myself across many companies, many startups, large, small business, venture-backed, you name it. I've used Gusto for payroll, for benefits, for employee onboarding, HR, even small group health insurance for nearly any budget. Best of all, Gusto pays all your federal, state, and local payroll taxes in all 50 states. It turns an incredibly time-consuming and painful process into the click of a button. That's why I like Gusto. Oh, and if you're listening to this, you can get 3 months free at gusto.com/Eric. That's gusto.com/ERIC. It was incredible. I mean, I had to teach myself all those technologies. It was not covered in my computer science degree. This was considered like primitive. And yet from a utility point of view, like as actually getting started, it was so much more useful.
Yeah.
And I want to hear that story from you because, you of course, you got to see it from the other side. But to me, one of the recurring things, and I really want to get your view on this, is even though almost all of us in the technology industry have had this experience of just being blessed with the incredible bounty of open source that makes it so much easier to get started, that allowed us to build things with totally different economics and to have control over our own platforms. Even still, I meet founders all the time who have a hard time justifying making their own contributions open source. And so how can that be? Like it's a really funny paradox. So I want, and the reason is, of course, is that investors, lawyers, all kinds of people tell them that it will harm their commercial prospects. It's, it could be risky or dangerous, and people have these kind of vague fears about it. Well, you've had, almost more success than anybody building in the open source ecosystem for-profit companies that have had really transformational effect, not just in my life, but in the lives of millions of others. So I want to hear the story of how it all started. Now, what I think is really interesting about you is you are not the founder of many of the companies that you have led as CEO,
Right?
Which I've heard you say on other occasions that you actually like it that way. So anyway, it's such a different story than other people, and what people imagine the technology industry is. I want to hear it straight from the horse's mouth. How did this all start?
The thing is, I'm a hired CEO with founder mode.
Yeah,
like when I go in, I become like a founder, but I'm not the founder. But I operate as if I had founded it. But I'm so stupid, I can't come up with those ideas. Like it's not within my intellectual reach. But running them, building them, sure.
All right, so take me back to the geniuses then who actually did come up with MySQL, and how did you get involved?
Right. So I go all the way back to 1981. I'm fresh out of high school. I go to Helsinki University of Technology, best university I was aware of in the whole universe. And I started to study technical physics. And there are a few other boys and girls doing that. And one of them was Monty Videnius, who was to become the founder and CTO of MySQL. There was another guy, Kai Arne, who also joined MySQL. So in a small group of boys studying physics, we got to know each other. We started playing poker together and have fun. And Monty then had been, at around the same times, he started working with two Swedish guys on data warehousing projects. They did that for 12 years together. And then they said, hey, let's build an API on top of our data warehousing things. And we've heard that SQL is a good standard. Let's use the SQL standard because it's also needed on the web. So they wrote first just the sort of the API to the data, the top of the database. And then as they were doing that, they thought, we need to build maybe a storage mechanism as well. So they built the storage, and then together it became MySQL, which they then announced in 1995. And there were other predecessor products before. There was something called Unireg that they had built, for instance, that they used. But 1995, they started MySQL, and of course we were friends, and we were like mocking them and saying, okay, you guys, what are you doing? Like, we are studying here to become big bosses and join big companies, and you're just messing around with some software there. Like, will you ever grow up? It wasn't open source at the time. They were just building it, but it started working better and better for the customers. And in the summer of 2000, they had the revelation. That was sort of without my intervention, but the founders had the revelation. They had listened to Richard Stallman, and they had the revelation they have to switch from a closed source license to an open source license to be able to be part of the Linux distros. Because the path to the market was 100% through the Linux distros, Red Hat, SUSE, others. And those wouldn't accept you unless you were licensed under an OSI approved license. So MySQL decided to switch to the GPL license in the summer of 2000. They lost all their revenue because they had closed source revenue before that. So it was a big bet for them as founders. But then it started taking on, like you were one of those users who didn't pay anything, but you became a lifelong fan. And it started taking off like crazy. And then in December of 2000, I had run a .com startup that went bankrupt. I got fired. Everything was terrible. I wonder whether I will ever amount to anything ever anymore. And I got a call from them where they were saying, "Hey, Martin, we're sitting here in my kitchen." Those were the three MySQL founders. "And we've realized we need a CEO, and we think it could be you." And I said, "No," because we're friends, but I also knew how difficult they could be and how difficult Monty can be, like so argumentative, like blind to all kinds of realities in the world. So I had this instant reaction that no, I can't, like, I love you, but I can't work with you. But then I said, I'll come and help you with strategy and stuff. And so I engaged in building a strategy on taking it out to the world, bringing VCs on board, selling, all of that competitive strategy. And in that process, then I couldn't help it. I just had to step in as the CEO, which I did. I agreed to do it in March 2001, and formally I was appointed in, I think, October 1st, once we had cleaned up. It was a big mess, like legally a big mess, intellectual property a big mess, ownership a big mess, everything was a big mess. Then we got sued in the US that summer by Progress Software Corporation. So that was an additional mess. So everything was a big mess, but we finally got it going, and yeah, then the rest is.
I want to go back to that moment, though. I actually didn't know that this little bit of the story that they made it open source in order to be in the Linux distros.
Yeah.
Because that's such a fascinating example of this phenomena I call gravity, where we usually see it in financial systems where, like, in order to conform, to get some advantage from the financial system, you have to conform your values to, sociopathic values. Right. But here we kind of have a great example the other way. Like, in some ways, Red Hat and SUSE, they are the ones, like, they should deserve some credit for the founding of MySQL also, because if it wasn't for that advantage that they reserved only for those who aligned with their values,
you could see it in many ways. You could see that they were difficult, that they didn't accept closed source products, or you could see that they were idealistic and doing the right thing. I fully appreciate what they did, but I do think it was an exertion of channel power, like anybody will do.
Absolutely. But in defense of good values in this case. So by creating an incentive for people to adhere, to join the movement, it actually was not exclusionary. It was actually allowing new entrants to come in and break the hegemony of the closed source providers that they were dependent on at that time.
But now when Apple will say, give me 30% of your mobile app revenue to be on our platform, they are also exerting channel power in a similar way. They just have a different requirement.
Exactly. Yes, and I think that's what's really interesting is that the power itself is value neutral. The question is, what do you use that power to do? And if you use that power to incentivize people to do good stuff, and that's actually that's beneficial. Otherwise, it can be predatory.
Yeah. Yeah, one of the early emails from the MySQL founder said something like, hey, if you buy a license, we will also send you the source code if you promise not to show it to anybody else. So that's how
that's
it
how
started.
most people feel about their source code. I mean, look,
Exactly.
every engineer can tell you the first time they heard about the idea of open source, and the first time it occurred to them. Usually not that same day, but at some point it occurs to you that involves showing other people your source code. Looking at other people's source code is fine, but sharing your source code, it can feel quite frightening.
Yeah.
And I think that deters a lot
In
of
that
people.
way, open source is a bigger divider of success, meaning to succeed in open source, your software has to be really, really good. And if
Yeah.
it is not really, really good, no matter how good you are at everything else, you will fail. So it divides you it's a brutal divider into products that can survive and products that can't. And
Yeah.
I would assume that some people think, okay, my software might not be that good, but I'm so good at selling and marketing and everything else. So I'll keep my software closed source and I'll build a closed source company so that I'm not exposing myself to this very harsh external judgment of the community. Because
Yeah.
back in 1999, when you downloaded MySQL and installed it, soon you were probably looking into the source code. If you had seen bad coding, you would have gone and looked for something else. Maybe you would have ended up with Postgres.
maybe.
Maybe.
I wasn't smart enough to use Postgres in those days. And in
No,
fact,
no,
I
no.
didn't.
Still, nobody is. It because they always built a complex, scientifically true product, and like they always told me when I met them, they said, "Okay, Martin, maybe you have the brand, but we have the product." And
Right.
I responded with, "So."
Well,
Yeah,
that's interesting
those
you
were
say
fun
that,
days.
because on the other hand, when you're talking about this divide, I think it's really interesting because a lot of closed source companies flatter themselves that they have the best product, and
Yeah,
and yet
yeah,
they're afraid to expose themselves to this kind of rigorous
true.
competition.
Yeah,
And
but
so
you
I
should
kind of
never
feel like
believe self-flattery. Like it is never
right,
true.
exactly. I think it's a huge liability. Companies are
Yeah.
fooling themselves about the caliber of their own product, and they're actually telling on themselves in their fear of open sourcing it.
Well,
Um,
in full fairness, Oracle is not open source, and the Oracle database has done magnificently well in the market. And they
yeah,
keep saying we have the best product, but they never show the source code. So now we could ask, how can it work? Why isn't the world seeing through those claims and realizing that they are hiding their source code for a reason? That's
hmm
always what we said at MySQL. We said Oracle could never go open source. Like it would be such a shame for them to show their source code. There's a
mm,
reason they keep it closed. Like
interesting.
they can't show their underwear because it looks so bad. But and of course that was good marketing ploy and saying it, and I think it is true. But just looking at it rationally, Oracle has built a giant business. It is still
Yeah.
running. There are still people using the Oracle database, although there's no technical reason remaining for doing so, but they still have a gigantic business running on it. So we must know in this world that there's a purity and awesomeness of open source that's like unbelievable and unstoppable and greater than anything else. But it doesn't preclude certain closed source companies from also doing very well.
Well, what's interesting to me about it is it's not like open source is a guarantee of success. Far from it, and
Right.
it's not. But neither is being closed source. It's
Yeah.
nothing. There are no
Yeah.
guarantees in life.
Right.
But I think open source has a tendency to attract the purists, people who are really in it for the love of making the product itself versus some other external desire for fame and fortune or whatever else.
Yeah.
And as a customer, and this is why I want to get your perspective, because I want to hear you. You were the
Yeah.
first party vendor. I was your customer. So as your
Yeah.
customer, I felt like I want to be buying a product from someone who cares about me for its own sake. Someone
Right.
who actually is trying to make a great product for me.
Yeah.
And even though it doesn't
Yeah.
have all the features, and even though it's not as fancy,
Yeah.
I feel like we're on the same side. Whereas these other vendors, I felt I had an adversarial relationship with, and they would sell me out for $1 instantly. So talk about like company building side of this. You come into this situation like many
Yeah.
startups, it's a total mess. You
Yeah.
get sued. You get to do a lot of cleanup. Okay, so you get through that. I'm sure that was quite a delight. Consumes a year of your life or whatever it is. But you get to the
Yeah.
other side of it, and now you have to turn yourself to like, okay, how do we build a company on the basis of this ethos? So what was that like?
It had this very sensitive and difficult question of how do you drive two initiatives that are seemingly contradictory with each other.
Mm-hmm.
Because by that time, the MySQL founders were like, okay, it's open source. It must be open source. It must be open source forever. And I came on board saying, okay, if you hire me as CEO, I will build a commercial business. And I believe in all what you're teaching me about open source. So I have no issue with it. But you must know that my job as a CEO is to build a viable business. And we must agree that there's a yin and yang here at play, that without a good business, we can't keep up our GPL product. Without an amazing product and community, we won't build a business. Like that, these are mutually reinforcing, although in many everyday decisions, they were like at opposite ends of something, like they were at odds with each other. And we had to make decisions.
Give us an example of feeling that tension and how you found the synthesis solution.
Well, we had this is not exactly one, but I don't know why I thought about it. We once closed a deal with SCO Unix, Santa Cruz Operation, the ones who sued Linux for IPR violations.
I remember that. Yeah.
People hated them completely. They came to us and said, if we pay you, can you port your database to our platform? And we had this question of, okay, we hate them too. We hate what they're doing to Linux. But then I told my colleagues, if they are ready to part with their money and give it to us, and we are developing more GPL software, more open and free software as a result, it's good. Like even like no matter what you say about them, but getting money from a criminal is not bad. It's actually good because the criminal has less money to spend on their whatever they are doing. So we decided to strike a deal with them on porting MySQL to some operating system of theirs, and they paid us real money. And I was on Slashdot, which was the discussion site of the era, for 2 to 3 weeks, like 10 hours a day. People hated us for it. And I had to explain the reasoning why we did it, and that our goal was not to support them in attacking Linux. Our goal was to support those who were still using their platform, who also needed a great database that was developed and delivered under the GPL license. But it was a very tricky thing because the first reaction was so strong. They would say, okay, you sold out to the devil. We hate you now. We will never use you again. And then when I went through the whole explanation that took like 20 hours per person, then some people said, okay, maybe, but I'm still angry or something. So that was not a conflict like inside the company,
almost.
but it shows where you end up with a strong open source commitment. Like, how do you actually apply it in everyday business decisions? And here, as CEO, I said, let's take the $250,000 or whatever we were paid, and it's not going to make them more successful in the lawsuit against Linux. It is only to make their own customers more successful, and those who are already using it, and we're building more open source software. So anyhow,
would you have felt differently if you were giving them the money?
We would have given them the money. Yeah, we would not give them money. No, clear.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's really important to recognize that there are distinctions to be had.
Sure. But of course, like admittedly, I had to go to wherever they were in Utah. I had to meet with their CEO. I had to sit down with him and agree on things. I didn't find him disagreeable at all. Like I felt we could have a regular business conversation. So in a way, like some people are so black and white, they say you shouldn't even talk to them. You shouldn't even give them your time. I did that. Right. I did sit down with him. I had lunch with him or something. We struck a deal. But I also feel that you must not go into this like mass hysteria just because somebody is upset with somebody. It doesn't mean that everybody must condemn them. Like if you pile on too much, then you create like irrational behavior as well.
Yeah,
like the world isn't that simple.
Yeah. That's a great example of institutional strength. That is, you had the conviction that what you were doing was right. You were able to weather the controversy. I think a lot of companies we see today, if there's any controversy around, they fold instantly. They can't bear to be the subject of any kind of controversy. Yeah. And we also have some companies that make a mistake and stubbornly dig in. So you could imagine a situation, I'm sure you could tell me many stories of times when you made a mistake and the community had to correct you. So being able to make those distinctions to say, yes, I would take their money, but I wouldn't give it to them. Yeah. And I'll spend the 20 hours on Slashdot defending the app because I really believe it. Like that is actually a sign of a strong culture company. Yeah, because you have your own, you have independent conviction in your own principles, and you're willing to bear the consequences as they come.
Right. And this was part of the culture at MySQL. We had a tendency to run to the fire, not away from it. So when things got really difficult, we tried not to shy away from them and not to gloss over or ignore the problem, but rather solve it deeply. But to solve deeply is really hard. Like suddenly you get from those who care, you get these emails that are 20 pages long. And then you have to spend like 5 hours on some discussion and 10 hours on Slashdot. Like it's very, very taxing to be in that. And you have to believe, okay, I'm doing this. This will take 2 weeks out of my life. But when we come out, our culture is stronger, our principles are stronger, and we've sort of battled out an important thing that make it easier for us in the future. And I'm an optimist. I always believed in it. So whatever like hard battle I was going into, I thought, okay, this is actually for the good of the long-term future. Like when we were sued by Progress Software Corporation, like there was no MySQL AB company at the time, so they sued like John Doe Corporation, and they sued me personally and other people personally because they had nobody else to sue for unfair trade practices in the US. How do you
for giving the database away for free?
Sort of. Yeah. No, they were trying to co-opt our business. That was they had signed a partnership, and then they thought they could sort of take over the brand and everything. And we said, no, that's not possible. Like we own our brand, it's our product. We're going to build a business ourselves. But we fought that battle. It was the first time the GPL license came up in a lawsuit. We sued them for GPL violation, which they had done. And we would ultimately have prevailed in court. And that's when finally they caved and paid us.
I remember it well because there was a big question about who will stand up for these licenses.
Yeah.
To test them in court, to pay the money to demonstrate that this way of building is legitimate, is valid. Yeah. And again, to me, that's a sign of institutional strength that, you were willing. I love what you said. You were running towards the fire, not away from it.
But we had a term sheet from our VCs, and I had to go back and say, good news, bad news. And they said, what's the bad news?
What's the good news? Yeah.
I said, we've been sued in America. Like these sort of teenage boys from Finland and Sweden have been sued in America, sort of. We were not teenage anymore, but it felt like it. And they said, what's the good news? Then we had decided to voluntarily cut our valuation in half. We said, VCs, you cannot leave us now. Like we will die if you leave us stranded here, but we will give us twice as many shares. We will cut our valuation in half because sure, this is a big challenge to us. So none of them backed out. They all did the deal. We got 4 million euros in our A round, and we spent 1.6 million on the lawsuit. So like a third of all the money we raised. But it became the most amazing marketing campaign for MySQL ever, because we decided to be fully transparent. We published every email that ever had been said. And they had said something really bad things on emails to us. We published them all. We published our internal decisions. We published everything. And the whole world could follow the lawsuit in real time. Like every time they sued us or something and we countersued, we put it online. And people back then loved anything that was online. Like the internet was relatively new, and there was like an endless curiosity and appetite among people to engage and read long documents. So it sort of cemented our place as the main database player in the open source world. So it turned out well. But those were hard things, and we weren't sure we would really survive, but we felt like we had to fight.
I want to go back to your point about running towards the fire. One of the things that has come up a lot in these conversations is a concept I've been calling harder is easier, where you already said it really, that on the surface, many of these things, your values that you're committed to kind of get you into these situations where you have to do harder work than you would have liked. Like it would obviously be easier to cave, just settle the lawsuit, to reverse yourself, don't argue with the people on Slashdot. But by doing the hard work up front, you actually make life easier for yourself in the long run. And I want to talk about that because that, to many founders that I meet,
I actually disagree with the exact words you said, but I'm sure you'll let me respond in a moment.
Please do. No, please do. I want to hear. I want to hear.
Yeah. So you said, I've been thinking about this a lot. You said, and maybe people say, do the hard thing so that it gets easier or something like that.
Yeah.
I think we say it to comfort ourselves. I don't think it will ever get easier. I just think it will get more successful. Like it will get more pleasing or more fulfilling.
Yeah.
But if you do the hard thing and then you achieve something and they say, oh, now it's easy. Actually isn't easy because then the bar has been raised again and then you have a new hard thing to do. So
here's what I mean by it. And I want to get I actually want to get your take on this because this is actually this is important.
Yeah.
I want to get it right. So it's not so much that it gets easier. I agree with you. Entrepreneurship never gets easier. It's every time you level up, the boss from the previous level is like the Goomba in this level. It just keeps going like that, like a video game. Only you can't beat it. It's like a roguelike. You go on forever. Yeah. But the thing that I do think is interesting is companies that have this ethos, that stand for something, that build a strong culture, that have that institutional strength. They don't have certain problems that everybody else in business complains to me about all the time. So think about, like building a brand as differentiated. Well, you never had that problem because anyone would be stupid to follow you. You're so out there, so beyond the mainstream at that time. But also I'm sure you'll say, to attract and retain like true believers who like truly believe in your mission. I'm sure you had a huge talent advantage because of that. And even being able to bring in aligned investors, like there are these extra benefits. Like people who are in non-strong companies complain to me about employee communications 24/7.
Yeah.
They can never get their own employees to understand their strategy, let alone implement it. Not that it's easy. Yeah. I'm sure it wasn't easy at MySQL, but like fundamentally,
it wasn't,
the alignment was built in.
Yeah. And also early on, it's not that anything was given to us. It wasn't easy to get investors. Like in the Nordics, where we got investors, nobody understood open source software. And where they did understand software, they were so far away in Silicon Valley that they didn't care about the Nordics. So it was very difficult to find anybody who was physically close enough and got it. And you said hiring talent. Sure, but also not. Like in the early days when we tried to hire people, like nobody would really get it. And if somebody had talent, they were practically like unsuitable for our business. Like we had to hire people without talent, sort of. No, that's unfair to say, but we really had to just
maybe without
people,
credentials.
Yeah, people who were just so ready to invest all of them into it. So they built it out of there, but it's not like they came with some amazing background to us. Some did. Of course, it got better and better and better. But in the beginning, and it was the same at Eucalyptus, it was the same at HackerOne later on. Like HackerOne was so disruptive that when I tried to hire some of the best executives to help me run the business, so many said, okay, Martin, this is too scary. It's too risky. I can't join. I'm like, what's wrong with you, talented people? Like, have you lost your fighting spirit and your readiness to take on a really hard challenge?
I think that is in fact what's happened to a lot of people who come up through elite circles. Yeah.
Well, that's what we say in defense when they don't join us. We rationalize it that way.
That is definitely our defense mechanism.
They should make their own decisions, and it was maybe I didn't sell it well enough. But anyhow, but we did at MySQL have this dedication to the cause, and we spent so many hours discussing it, debating it, even the branding. That was actually one thing that the founders and we who then joined did very, very well. Like when I joined, MySQL didn't have any logo or anything. It had there was one T-shirt with some fire-spitting dragon or something that looked so bad. I said, no, we need something people can remember us for. And at one point, our founder said, I like dolphins. And someone said, why? Well, they are kind, intelligent, and fast. And in groups, they kill sharks. I'm like, whoa, what a statement. So we decided we must have a dolphin as our mascot. So I went to an amazing graphics designer in Helsinki and said, okay, create a logo for us with a dolphin. We must have a dolphin. And it came from this statement by the founder. Mm-hmm. And then he made many proposals, and the dolphin was always jumping up to the right. like you do in the Western world. Everything has to go up to the
Up
right.
and to the right, of course.
And I was like, no, something is wrong here. We are contrarians, like we are rebels. Can you do something? So he turned it around. And if you look at the MySQL logo, the dolphin jumps up to the left. And I'm sure in those cultures where you read from right to left, they're like, yeah, what's the big deal?
Of course you would.
Of course you would. But in the Western world, we meant it as a statement that we are not like everybody else. We dare to be different. We don't care where the sharks are jumping. We are jumping up and to the left, and we are many, and we are fast and kind and intelligent. And
I like to mix the metaphor of running to the fire, but also swimming towards the sharks.
yeah, yes.
But I do think that I mean, listen, again, from the outside, that always seemed like the ethos of the company.
Yeah.
And I do want, I'm going to press you on this point because I want you to talk about, so, okay, it's, we can joke about whether the people with talent want it or not want it, but I can relate to that feeling that you're going to battle with true believers. They may not be the best credentialed. They may not have there's all kinds of things they don't have, but what they do have is true belief. Like, talk about what that's been like to build companies where, because listen, a lot of people have never worked in a company like that. They've never founded a company like that. They've never been employed. They've never seen on the inside what it looks like when a company truly has that level of alignment. Like, what was that like?
It is a great question because it sort of just happened to me, but I realized that, like you said, I've gone through something that many haven't. I think it starts with seeing the potential and power in every human being and not being prejudiced on what you see. Like, I saw this when I moved to Silicon Valley, that there were companies or others who would say, yeah, we only hire from Stanford Business School or something. Mm-hmm. And I understand it's a functioning recipe, but you don't get that dedication, that enormous innovation then, because you've already filtered your candidates through a filter that produces good results, but it's similar results. We had nothing like that. Like, so when I joined, these were not my hires, but marketing was run by a veterinarian who lived on a farm, and he ran marketing for us. Okay, we then had another marketing person join, but we had this notion that there's nothing, we won't judge you for anything other than lack of belief in what we are doing. So if you have a different background, if you have no background, if you don't speak good English, whatever, like, there are things that wouldn't land you a job in a regular tech company. We didn't care about those. We said, if you are on board fully and with your whole heart, and you never compromise on honesty and openness and working together, then you're welcome. And we had employees all over the world. We were the first distributed or remote organization probably in the tech world. But we had this way of accepting people as they were. And I do think it came from the founders, and then with me as CEO, like, there was nobody in the top leadership who would not think like that and who wouldn't be very open-minded on all those things and welcoming of everybody, and without regard to their background, with just regard to how they are leaning in and committing to what we are doing. And some of them became just the best of the best of the best. Of course, not all of them, but many. And that was how we built a culture that would last so long, that still today, like 2008, Sun Microsystems acquired MySQL, and now it's part of Oracle. If you go into that team today, you still find the same culture inside. Although it's not the typical Oracle culture, but the MySQL team has the culture that we built 25 years
ago. I know that some people are listening to this and thinking, but what about performance management? Like, surely, like in so many companies, performance and kind of these other factors are at odds with each other. Did you struggle with that? With how I guess the question is, like, if someone's a true believer, does that excuse poor performance, or is that more likely to cause exceptional performance?
I think performance management is always difficult, no matter what you have at your hands, because it's not fun, and you would like things to be good, and we are optimists if we are building a company. So, like, our tendency is to want to build things rather than yell at our colleague for not building the thing. But I don't agree with the initial problem statement that you had, or that there would be a conflict. My view is that only if you have a very direct and open relationship with somebody can you really give them feedback so that it's received well. Because any boss can yell at somebody else and say you didn't reach your quota or you didn't ship good code, but for that feedback to be received in a productive way so that they improve their performance, there must be a level of trust. And trust you get by being open, vulnerable, engaging, caring about your employees. So my experience is that you must see the human in every interaction and respect the human. And then the task is a separate thing. I can still yell at you for the task you didn't do, but I can love you as the human you are. And it sounds like a difficult thing to do, and it is difficult, but it's a skill you can learn, to be this person who has unlimited respect for the human value and the human soul, the human who's trying to do their best. Well, sometimes they're not even trying to do their best. Sometimes they're lazy, but anyhow, they are trying to try. And on the other hand, the work that needs to be done. And at MySQL, we had people who we loved and who loved us, who we fired because we realized they didn't keep up and sort of their execution didn't improve at the rate at which our company was growing. And we said, okay, we loved you. We have always loved you, but what you did earlier is not enough anymore. And if you can't up your game enough, then you need to go somewhere else. And they went somewhere else. So I see them as going hand in hand, but it doesn't make it easy or fun or anything. And let's be clear, in a software business, you don't always know who is really good and who isn't. Like when you're developing software, somebody will say, I halted the shipment, I need 2 more weeks to get it in shape. Okay, is that a sign of strength or weakness?
Depends,
exactly. Some will do it because they really don't know how to code the shit. Others will do it because they have this very high standard of quality and they will only ship stuff that can deliver value in the market. So then as the manager or the boss, you have to have an opinion on it. Was this actually a heroic act and we should give the person a bonus, or does it mean the person isn't up to the task? And those are very, very difficult. And even if you have a hunch, you may need a few cycles to learn how people operate and talk to others. So this is just to say that performance management is not always pleasant, and it certainly isn't easy.
Did you feel like employees had a longer tenure, longer longevity with the company, the ones who really were exceptional because they had that true belief?
I can say that I try to build companies with long tenure for those who keep evolving with the company. And sometimes they don't evolve and they need to leave. Sometimes they don't evolve, but they settle on something and are okay with their job not growing all the time.
It's the reason I ask is because a lot of companies I meet with are struggling. They only hire high pedigree people, like you're saying.
Yeah.
Who they believe will be high performance, but then they can't retain them because those high pedigree people are in demand everywhere else also, and so they kind of cycle through companies like a commodity. Whereas companies that have built true believers, when they do make the leap, they tend to stay.
True. I think the world of tech and digital businesses is today so large. There's room for every model. So you would probably find some CEO for your podcast who will say, okay, I have this model, Stanford business grad only. I fire them after 18 months because then they're useless or whatever. Like, I don't even know. But I could imagine it works. For some, that will work. I represent a model that certainly works, produces amazing value, produces value in a capital efficient way. Meaning the way, like my leadership style is suitable to businesses that don't intend to spend too much VC money. So there's less dilution for the founders. That's where it's useful. But I acknowledge that there's somebody else who will go in and raise 3 times more money, spend all the money, but somehow come out on top of it anyhow. And without long tenures, without a strong culture, without all the things that I think are valuable. So I don't think there's a one size fits all or just one way of doing it. I wouldn't even judge the other models. I'm thinking if somebody else wants to do that, let them do it, because that gives me more like space to operate in the way I want to operate. And then it means these wonderful employees who I would like to hire will join me because they see the unique value of the culture.
What matters is that the approach is coherent.
Sure.
All of the aspects of your leadership and your strategy, it's all aligned around some common purpose.
Yeah.
So
Well, it isn't leadership, isn't if it isn't coherent. It isn't strategy if it isn't coherent. It's not culture if it isn't coherent. So, of course, a startup in the beginning is very messy and nobody knows anything, and later everybody will say I had no clue, but still, somehow they find this consistency and
or it
coherence.
explodes. Yeah, one or the other.
Or exactly.
So let me go back to the story, because MySQL is just a really fascinating business case to me in so many ways, including the fact, spoiler alert, I guess you already mentioned it. Like, after all these years of doing battle with Oracle, today MySQL is a wholly owned subsidiary of the Oracle Corporation. It's totally fascinating. But along the way, it generated tremendous returns for the founders and for its investors, and had a big exit. So just like, we reflect on it now, like, bring us up to date. Like, how did it feel to go from the heroic underdogs, under-resourced, to have all this success, and then ultimately how it wound up? Like, how does it land with you now?
Well, first I'll say that a reason to sell to Sun Microsystems was to avoid being acquired by Oracle. Because Oracle was eager to acquire us for a long time, and we were planning to go public. And I realized that as a public company, you can also be acquired. And a way, it's maybe more difficult to say no because you have public investors there. So there were several reasons playing into my own decision. But when I decided that I will be in favor of Sun's offer, one was, I think it will keep us away from Oracle. Not that I ever doubted their ability to run the business. I just felt that they have a different culture, and I wanted to keep MySQL away from that culture. But as if you will read my interviews from the time, I never doubted that. Some people said Oracle will kill MySQL. I never thought so. I knew they would do a very good job of it, just a different type of job. So anyhow, but when we built MySQL, we sort of had this joy of making fun of the big database companies, mostly Oracle, but also Microsoft and IBM. And we made fun of them as much as we could, always. Like we said, Oracle, they have 50,000 employees. These are people who are like dragging their feet to the office every day, and Oracle has to pay them money whether these people do any work or not. We have 50,000 volunteers downloading our product every day, full of enthusiasm and joy and building value, and we pay them nothing. Like, which model will work? So we had all these like wonderful contrasts with them. But internally, we also said, like, when we looked at Microsoft, we said, hey, if Bill Gates would start a company today, he would start an open source company. Like, it's not that Microsoft, although they spoke as if they hated open source, they were and are opportunists. If they had started in 2001, they would have built an open source company. They just started in whatever, 79 or something.
Sure.
And with Oracle, we had a similar situation where we said, okay, they are closed source. They are very cocky. They will never admit any fault. They will never let anybody test their product or see their source code. But we do acknowledge that they have a very powerful way of building a business, and we can learn from how they market and price and package. So we tried at MySQL not to be like too arrogant in our cockiness.
Yeah, not to be dismissive.
Yeah, we challenged them, but then in internal meetings every now and then said, okay, let's now see, what can we learn from Oracle? What can we learn from Microsoft? What could we learn even from IBM? So therefore, when we sold to Sun, a goal was not to end up with Oracle. But I remember the moment I was signing the contract paper in Orlando on 16th of February, I think it was 2008, as my hand was going over the paper with my signature, I thought, shit, if Oracle really wants us, they could buy all of Sun. And it was just like a lightning that struck me.
It occurred to you only at that moment.
Yeah. And then, of course, a year went by, and then Oracle said, we are going to acquire Sun Microsystems. And that's exactly what happened. But at that point, I think Sun had done a phenomenal job in the acquisition, like how they respected the culture and welcomed us. It was just perfect. Like, there's nothing I have no complaints about Sun Microsystems in that respect. They had amazing lawyers, amazing HR department, amazing leaders who made it just a perfect integration. So once then Oracle started happening, the MySQL team was used to being part of a corporation and wasn't afraid anymore of ending up sort of in the wrong place. And that's what you see now. That still led the engineering team by a person who joined us in 2003. So
Oracle's been respectful of it, actually, in the end.
They have. Like, Oracle doesn't have the same interest. They don't care about the open source community. They are not trying to be rebels. There are many things that they are not. But they know how to manage a brilliant technical product, and they've made it better. Like we had merged together with a group at Sun who came from a Norwegian database company. Then they and others rebuilt the optimizer in a very good way. Now they built MySQL HeatWave, which is an excellent addition to the database. And these are all happening under the stewardship of Oracle. So sort of as I predicted, they will manage the asset very, very well. Sure, they are no longer the community-driven fun thing that you saw in 1999, but then things change, and we did what the founders wanted to do. We had agreed that if we build a company around this, then the purpose is to build a great business and get to a liquidity event that will reward the shareholders. And that's what happened.
Do you wish there would have been a way to get liquidity while also maintaining the company's independence? Like if you could go back in time and magically do that, would you have wanted that to have happened, or are you have no regrets about it now?
Well, we CEOs tend to forget our regrets and say, I have no regrets. I don't have regrets, but it was a very difficult decision making for me personally, because I had thought that everybody would participate in the decision, but on the board, I said, Martin, we will do what you recommend. If you want to continue, we will say no. And we will even buy some of your shares so that your own economy will be in shape. So you really make your decision now based on what you think is best. So it took me weeks to arrive at the conclusion that it was good to sell. But certainly we could have said no, we could have continued. We had a plan of building a cloud service, which of course would make sense. Today, AWS is making billions of MySQL code as cloud services, RDS and Aurora. So sure, it could have been a very good possibility. I then concluded, I've done my job. I think this is a good offer to take, and it was good for everybody. But it was very hard to arrive at that decision.
Sure. I want to talk a little bit about HackerOne, because you did Eucalyptus after and then HackerOne, but HackerOne to me has that same pirate spirit. Like it was very audacious, and I know a lot of people thought it was just straight up nuts.
It is.
Do it. I really remember the controversy about it, especially in its early days. And so I want tell us the story. Like, how did you find that team, and how did you get convinced to go back into the counterculture and be the rebel again after you'd already had some success and didn't really need to anymore?
It was a really important moment in my life that, like, I knew I was ready to do a next gig. I had a spreadsheet where I had like 48 different companies listed. Not all had tried to recruit me, but many had. Like, I was dreaming of, like, I put Slack on that list. I said, I love that company so much. If they need a CEO, I'll join immediately. They didn't need a CEO, and they were doing fine, but they were on my list of wonderful companies at the time. And on that list then appeared HackerOne, because Benchmark called me and said, Martin, we have a great startup that you could run. And like I did with MySQL, I said, no, I'm not going to do cybersecurity. Like, these negative, cynical, nitpicky people, like, it's not for me. Like, don't bring any cybersecurity stuff to me. Like, my positive spirit can't really deal with that world. And they said, okay, fine, that's good, but would you meet with the founders? I said, sure, yeah, I'll meet with them and see if I can advise them or something. So I met with the founders, and like, I was sold in like 2 seconds or 20 seconds. I don't know how long it took, but I walked into the meeting and it smelled like MySQL. Like, I was back.
Right. Tell us about the meeting. What
I first
the
met
business at that time?
with
Yeah.
Marten, who was one of the co-founders. He was the CEO before me, and he is very charismatic. He has this magical way of selling things to you. And I had come in there thinking, okay, I don't like cybersecurity because of all the negativity, and they always think about risk, and they have to be very careful and cautious and cynical. And then Marine explained how HackerOne was doing the opposite, was turning the scary thing into a strength, was playing with openness instead of closeness, was bringing joy into solving problems and seeing problems as just the initial part of a solution. And I'm not sure he said all these things. Like some of them were my own constructs in them, but I was like, whoa, I've seen this before. And the community who loves it, and these like teenage girls and boys who are joining to ethically hack. I found it so awesome. And they said, Martin, we have 6,000 ethical hackers. It's so many. And I was blown away by the number. Now HackerOne has over 2 million. So 6,000 isn't that much. But back 10 years ago,
it seemed like a lot.
Yeah.
So explain, for those who don't know, explain what HackerOne, explain the business.
So it's a practice that was developed essentially first by Netscape, but then put into big practice by Microsoft, Facebook, and Google of running bug bounty programs. So you say, here's my software on the internet. You come in and test it. If you find a security flaw, a vulnerability in our software, report it to us. We will validate it. And if it's true, we will pay you a reward for having done this. So this creates a marketplace where anybody can test your software. If they find the more serious flaw they find, the better pay they can get. And Facebook said, we swear by this. Google said, we swear by this. Microsoft said, we swear by this. They still do. Those three run some of the biggest bug bounty programs in the world. So the idea was to take this practice that had been put into production by those three companies and make it accessible to anybody, even if you don't have the resources and skills of a Google or a Facebook, but that you can even a small company or a traditional company can run a bug bounty. So that's how HackerOne started, as that marketplace connecting any ethical hacker with any company who needed their service. A lot of had to be changed in that business model when I joined, but essentially it's crowdsourcing of work, and it's very similar to open source development. Like, I knew nothing about cybersecurity when I joined HackerOne, but I knew a lot about how to build communities, open source communities, and make them productive. And that was the key to our success there, and how we became the number one market leader in that whole space.
I'm sure a lot of people told you it was a bad idea. I mean,
everybody.
First of all, you're cultivating hackers. Everyone knows hackers are bad, so that's
even my friends said, Martin, don't do this. Like, don't risk your career. Go and take a job where you have a safe pay and you're not risking your reputation. And this is where I found in me this rebel again that said, what? If I've achieved this much in my life, why wouldn't I risk it again? Because I can afford. Like, I can take the chance, and I don't want to be in a boring job for the rest of my life. I want to do exciting things. But many of my friends said, don't go to such an early stage company. Like, HackerOne had practically zero revenue. There were like 600,000 in marketplace fees, but that was it. So it was very, very early. So I was in a way stupid to join that early.
Sure.
But I loved what I saw. And then when I met with all the founders and also some employees of the company at the time, I asked them, what's the culture like in this company? And there was one thing they all mentioned in different ways. They all mentioned transparency, openness.
Mm-hmm.
And they mentioned it so strongly, I realized it's true. It's not a fake value, but it's something they truly practice. And that, to me, it's very important to me to operate in a business with openness. So I thought, okay, I'm on board. This is me.
So you have not just the challenge of your typical product development challenge, you're building a marketplace. That's hard enough. You also are creating a whole new category, because it's not like customers at that time already know they want a bug bounty program. And as you say, cybersecurity had been dominated by this very risk-oriented approach. I'm sure for the people who had that mentality, that culture, this must have seemed extra risky. Now you're inviting hackers into the system. You're calling attention. It's like calling the ISR on to look at your weaknesses. That seems very frightening. So talk about it from a category creation point of view. How did you manage that?
I would say it was the most difficult part of HackerOne and most rewarding for that reason, but really, really hard, exactly for the reasons you mentioned, that there's no procurement budget for what you do. Sure, people do some application testing, AppSec in the AppSec world. They do pen testing, so they spend money on testing, but it's not like they have an item for a bug bounty or a vulnerability disclosure program. So we had to make our way in there. And then the notion that we are bringing you all the bad news, we are telling you how badly you suck, and you pay us for it. So that was hard. We started by selling to forward-leaning tech companies who knew about it and who didn't have problems understanding it. But then it spread from there. We got Department of Defense in 2016, so just when I joined. And that was a big opener of markets because people said, okay, if the Department of Defense can use this, then I can use it. And then after that, we had some banks joining. Goldman Sachs was one of the early ones. And then we got consumer brands who realized that consumers care about this thing. So Hilton Hotels, no, sorry, Hyatt Hotels. Hilton is also a customer. But Hyatt Hotels was the first hotel chain joining. When they joined, they issued a press release to their consumers, like not to their business audience, but to consumers saying, we now have a bug bounty program in order to protect your data when you stay at our hotels. And it sort of showed me, because I was building it and wasn't sure how to build the category, but it showed me that the consumer demand is driving a lot of this. Consumers get it. They are not afraid of bug bounties. It's the corporations that are afraid. So we got the fear removed, and it's still being removed by consumers saying, we love this. We want to stay in a hotel. We don't want bed bugs, but we also don't want software bugs. Like, we want our hotel chain to be very trustworthy. So, and then now all hotel chains are customers, and all telecom operators are customers, and Starbucks and many of these consumer brands.
Yeah. That the word you said is trustworthy, which I think is super important, and it really is a big part of the MySQL story too. That people, I find even now, founders have a hard time believing that this is true. That trust, like my view is, trust should be managed like an asset. Being trustworthy is a strategic advantage. And here you're showing off not just that you need to be a trusted party to your customers, but by helping them become more trustworthy to their own customers, then you actually create commercial benefit for them. And we see that anytime we have a company that is setting a standard, funny, in the same way that Red Hat did with open source all the way back at the start of MySQL, I'm making that, realizing it's just the same
thing.
When a customer can adhere to that standard and make themselves more trustworthy, it directly translates into commercial impact. I'm sure there's somebody listening to this right now who's like, that can't possibly be true. Customers care about the bug bounty program. Like, customers are stupid. There's no way. Like, I can hear them in my ear now. So explain, why is it so important? Like, you used this iconoclastic company culture, this another strong, institutionally strong company, to build this different culture, to turn this thing that customers tremendously feared into something that they could see as an asset, as a source of trustworthiness. Like, how did you perform that alchemy? And why should anyone believe you that it's really true, that it really happened? I think that is
they should look at HackerOne's numbers and see that it must be true because of the numbers.
Yeah, exactly.
I think it started back with openness. Like, we arrived at this conclusion that the only way to build trust is through transparency. Like, it's the only way. And we applied it on ourselves so that our customers could use us. I do think that consumers are, like, sometimes we say consumers don't care and they are lazy and stupid or whatever, but consumers get things quicker than corporations. And if you think about the consumer on the internet dealing with all these internet things, what's on your mind? You go somewhere and say, okay, this website sucks. The user experience sucks. This company doesn't care about me. They are pretending to care about me, but they don't really. Like, I don't like the experience here. So consumers are very tuned into how they're being treated digitally. So for them then to hear that here's a company, first Google, Facebook, and Microsoft, but then others who are letting other consumers, so to speak, test it and give their feedback, the consumers like, wow, that's me, that's us. Like it's our side being respected, and it's independent testing people who have no bias. They are not speaking the company's PR policy or anything. They're just testing. And although it's a long change of logic to see the value of bug bounties, somehow consumers are not in doubt. Like children understand it. You can explain it to grandparents. Like there's nothing. It's not difficult to explain to somebody who's just practical and say, of course, scrutiny, public scrutiny is.
That's such a great example. I mean, corporations treat their customers in so many ways like they're infants that they couldn't possibly understand that they're stupid. And I really think that is a big mistake. First of all, people are much more sophisticated than you think. And in some ways, corporate culture, the kind of MBA corporate culture, has become so esoteric that what corporations view as obvious, most people would find baffling. And conversely, there's these things that the general public is like, well, of course. And you see it in the AI safety debate. AI safety polls about as well as it can poll. People are very worried about AI. They absolutely want their vendors to be focused on safety. Yeah. And yet in the corporate world, we have this conversation about, is safety a constraint? Is it like inhibiting our ability to innovate? Is it this? And if you look at the investing opportunities available to the grand public, like if there was an AI safety ticker symbol, trillions of dollars of public money would be going into it, but there isn't, and there's nothing like that anyone in the public is even allowed to invest in. So it's like,
well, Eric, you can go to HackerOne and you can get an AI red teaming test done on your AI deployment, and we will take these same ethical hackers and have them test other things too, not just security but also safety.
Of course, that's why I thought of it. It seems like such a no-brainer approach. And I think, I've worked with a couple of companies that are trying to create new safety and insurance and liability standards for AI. And the biggest pushback that they get, both from investors, but also from lots of other corporate MBA type people, is like, there's no commercial benefit to doing that. So the only reason you do it is if you out of the goodness of your heart. And it's just, to me, it's just open source all over again. It's like there's this huge source of strategic advantage that is being ignored, ironically, in the name of efficiency, in the name of competitiveness. And
HackerOne did its first AI red teaming exercise 5 years ago for Twitter, looking for bias in their algorithm. And then the next one was Snap, where we tested the consumer behavior of they have a functionality to create images, and you are not allowed to create offensive images like swastikas. So then said, okay, see if you can create a picture of a swastika or not. Of course, our hackers managed to circumvent the rules and produced pictures of swastika. And Snap knew how to change their AI deployment.
It's smart that they did that before it became a huge liability for them.
Yeah. And again, the power here is the unbiased scrutiny. It is like finding a typo. You won't find a typo in your own text, but you can find a typo in your friend's text.
But it's much easier.
It's not your text. It's the same principle that applies in bug bounties. That sure, the ethical hackers are very, very smart, but it's not based on them being smarter than anybody else. It's just based on them being unbiased and independent. That's what
it's funny. It's the same point you raised at the beginning about open source. That it's the differentiator. If your product is good enough, it can survive the rigors of independent eyes looking at it. True. And if you are not strong enough for that, I think consumers understand what do you have to hide?
Yeah, but I've seen selling HackerOne's products, I've seen customers say, oh, okay, but we are not ready yet. We don't want this test yet. And you could see that they don't trust their own software production. So and then I say, it still is better to know than not to know.
Right.
Like you should test it even if you're not happy yet. But if you can fix it on your own, go ahead and do so, but don't say no to the testing.
So what happened to HackerOne in the end? Did it have an exit?
No. HackerOne keeps growing. I hired a successor. I ran it for 9 years, exactly 9 years on the day. And I thought, okay, I've done what I can do here. I should hire a successor who can take the next stage. So we hired Cara Sprague. She took over on November 2 or November 1st last year, and she's now running the business and growing it and all of the things that we built for in the past 10 years.
It's still thriving as an independent company?
Yeah. Independent company, plenty of cash, market leader, doing well, customer list to die for. Like the most awesome customer. Like if you are an awesome company in this world, you are a customer of HackerOne. And if you're not a customer of HackerOne, you're probably not an awesome company. It's that simple.
That is totally awesome.
Yeah.
Well, the last time we were touching base, you had, I was curious whether you had retired or what you were doing. You said that one of the things that you're spending a lot of time on now is coaching other CEOs. And so maybe you could just talk a little bit about, like, I'm very curious. You've had this incredible career and all these incredible experiences. How are you distilling that wisdom into new CEOs? Like, what do you want them to learn from you? How's that going?
So first of all, like I became a serial CEO, and then people said, Martin, how many companies do you still have in you? I said, I can do a few more, but at some point I'll stop. And now I've stopped building companies, and now I want to build CEOs. The difference is CEOs don't need to be built; they build themselves. But everybody can benefit from having the advice and input and coaching of somebody who's seen all the problems. And that's me. Mm-hmm. Like, I've also achieved success, but maybe my success stories are less useful than all my stories of disaster and problem.
Oh, sure.
So I thought that would be very rewarding for me to help first-time CEOs who are, like, they may have a massive business growing, but they've never done it before. And their VCs put pressure on them, and their executive team is reporting to them. But somebody like me can come in as a completely unbiased, objective, but still a supporter of the CEO. So I'm doing this now as my profession. Of course, that means I need to learn this profession. So I'm ramping up and figuring out how do you go from having been the CEO is on center stage, making decisions, speaking, galvanizing, and now I need to be in the background. So I'm training myself to be more in the background and not be the one calling the shots, but the one advising the one calling the shots. So it's an interesting shift for me mentally to see if I can do that. But wonderful relationships with CEOs, younger or older, whatever they are, who are building something, and they need this. They say, hey, Martin, I'm thinking through this. I don't know if I have it right. Am I thinking of the problem the right way, or am I not? What should I look at? Does this make sense? Am I too scared now? Am I too bold? Am I too what am I missing? And it's difficult for them to get that from anybody other than somebody who sort of has no other purpose than helping you. So that's my new profession.
Yeah, I like that kind of work, and I remember I went through a similar shift, having to realize that when you're in that role, you're not the main character of the story anymore.
No,
which is strange. But I always tell founders, even if it's not me, you better have somebody on this journey with you who's seen all the ways it can go wrong before. And it's funny, like, I remember I benefited from incredible mentors early on in my career.
Yeah,
and I remembered feeling like there was this time when I certain people, I was like, there's almost no situation I can be in that if I go call this person and ask them for advice, they won't say something like, "Oh yeah, that happened to me once." Or they're like, "Yeah, I know what to do." It's like you're just. Like, I remember once I was like, "Oh, you need to call the FBI. Have you called the FBI?" And I'm like, "What do you?" Really? And they're like, "Oh yeah, that happened to me once." And I was like, "How do they always know what to do?" It seems incredible to me. And now all these years later.
But here, Eric, is then the deeper truth is that, sure, operationally you do that. You say, okay, I've seen this, I know what you need to do. But if you are really coaching or mentoring a CEO, then you must also learn not to bring your solutions to every discussion. Because
exactly. That's what I'm
everybody's mileage will vary and their situation is different. And you solved it in your own life because you figured it out yourself. So if you now hand the answer complete to the CEO may not fully embrace it. So you have to somehow,
or even really understand it. Since part of the value of it is having figured it out yourself. Yeah.
So coaching is about finding, not giving the answer, but finding allowing the other person to find the answer in themselves, and that's what intrigues me, but which I also think is very difficult, because I also know when I was ran my first business when I was 25. If somebody had come to me and said, "Hey, Martin, I'll give you some advice," I would be like, I won't even listen to you. Like, who do you think you are?
No, thank you.
Like, I'm building this business. It's mine. Don't mess with me. I'm super intelligent. I'm super smart. I'm super good. I'm Superman. I have no flaws. Like, when you're young and building a business, you may not have the self-awareness to to realize that you could
Well,
benefit.
and we all know people who've been paralyzed by having too much advice.
Exactly.
Who never really learn to think for themselves and who don't know how to think from first principles. Tell me, I'm very curious in the conversations you're having with CEOs, not what is the most common advice they want from you, but rather what are the most common dilemmas that come up that you feel like, you're able to not give them the answer, but at least to coach them through the dilemmas. What are the most common issues that come up?
There are many. Like it's a varied field. So, but one is this: am I insane? And somebody like me said, "No, you're not insane. You're just a little bit crazy, but that's fine." Like let's sort of taking the nervousness out of it, because although we can be very cocky and confident when we're building a business, somewhere deep inside we have a great worry as well, and they can bring it up with me, and we can sort of diffuse it together. So that's one area. With some new like AI-based startups that, without their own planning, are growing like crazy. There, the CEOs have very, in a way, operational challenges. They're like, Martin, this is growing so fast. I don't have time to look at everything. I can see how it's breaking. Where do I put my time?
Yeah.
Like what's important and what isn't important? And it's not like their business is struggling. It isn't. They have abundance of things going on, but they don't know, because there are so many pieces of advice, like should they now invest more in culture or marketing or strategy or VCs or themselves? Like where should they have more meetings or fewer meetings? Should they bring everybody into the office or send everybody to work from home? Like all these operational questions that play out dramatically every day. So they have those sort of things. And then there's a big group, and nearly everybody has some like challenge ahead of them. And a very typical one is, how do I raise capital?
Mm-hmm.
And it's an innocent question, but it always splits up into multiple threads. Like I have to validate, do you have a strategy? Do you have a product? Do you have the team? Is this an attractive market? Is it something that makes sense to invest in? Like all these. So when they say, how do I raise capital? It sort of splits into 100 different questions depending on the business, but many ask about that.
Well, usually I end these episodes with like a lightning round where I quote from different things the person said in various interviews and just get them to react. But with your permission, I'd like to only ask you about one thing.
Oh,
which is not something that you published publicly, but something you sent me privately. But I thought was so fascinating that I had to ask you about it. And I was like, I couldn't think of any other way than just ask you directly, because you were sharing with me this philosophy you have that business is all about contrasts. And you gave a couple of examples, and one of which I'm just going to quote it here. You said, you have a choice between two things. Some people say you should pick one. Some people say pick the other. And some people think you should go for like the mushy middle ground in between. And I certainly have encountered many situations where people would tell me those are the only three options available.
Right.
And your claim is there's another option that people don't consider. Explain what you mean by that. Call it the theory of contrast.
Yeah, it comes from my rebellious mind. But I hate it when people oversimplify and say, oh, okay, we just have to choose left or right, or let's take the two and do the average of the two and say that's the answer. But then you get gray color and you get bad things. And if you choose just one, you may lose out on the real opportunity. And I see it everywhere in life and business. A specific example is in leadership. And I'll now give you a sort of an extreme example. I was at the dinner. There was this brilliant business leader, Julia Mossbridge, who talked about, she said, unconditional love at the workplace. I said, hey, Julia, where are you dreaming? There's nothing, like a workplace is not unconditional. Like unconditional love at the workplace just doesn't work. This doesn't make any sense. And she took me through it, and I'm not going to speak for her or even defend her thinking, but it reminded me again that when you lead people, if you can separate the human from their performance and treat them as they should be treated, the human should be treated with respect, with compassion, with love, with care, with listening, with like a certain kindness to them. The performance should be treated like performance should, meaning what's the horsepower, what's the top speed. Is it going at top speed? How fast is it going? Is it producing? And many people think that you can do just one, that you have to treat your employees as robots and just yell at them if they're not producing. And somebody else think the only thing you need to do is be kind to your employees. If you do just one of those, it won't work. Both will fail. And that's why I say that don't choose one or the other. The best leaders do both. So they will have this nearly limitless respect for the human who is struggling to get their job done and sort of can empathize with them. And while at the same time, this sort of gives them the right to be very specific about performance. And when you have respect with a human being, then you can say, okay, let's look at your sales performance. You haven't hit your target now in 3 quarters. What does it mean? Like, can you do it or can't you do it? Do you have to leave the company or take another job or something? And that discussion is easier to do and becomes more productive because both of you know that there's a human connection that's not being harmed by this. And this is what founders say when they start companies. They said, okay, Eric, we're founding a company. Remember, if it all breaks down, we're still friends. Like, founders do this. They physically do this. They say, we must not let the business affect whether we're friends or not. It ends up still affecting it. But I agree, like, you should keep them separate. And keeping them separate and going full force on both is the success recipe. So to be like a demanding leader on performance, you also have to be a compassionate human that others can relate to. And there are many other things in life, like we had at MySQL, like we had open source users and paying customers. And every now and then we had to choose where to put our budgets and where to put our money. But we knew that as a strategy, we live off both. And if we kill one of them, the other one will also die. So you can't just choose one. And we have it at HackerOne similarly, where you have to sort of serve 2 masters because those masters are codependent on each other. So anyhow, I built this thinking in me, which I called for myself contrasts. Like, it's not, people say, oh, it's a fine balance. I said, no, it's not a balance. It's a contrast. You should go full force here and full force there and not stay in the middle. Just a month ago, I realized some other dude has developed this thinking before much more clearly. He calls it polarities. And he has a whole book about polarities and how we think about it. So I realized, okay, I didn't invent anything new. I was just figuring out things that others had been figuring out. But it really, to me, intrigues me and lets me address problems that otherwise would be unresolvable.
Yes, that's the part of it that I find so interesting. And that, you know, I mean, listen, you could say this is just Hegelian thesis, antithesis, synthesis. You know, it's
yeah.
That's a lot of people talk about this. But listen, but having a theory, it's easy. I can say that easy, but applying it in real life is quite challenging. Yeah. And what I think is really interesting.
I see, if I may interrupt you, I see VCs in boardrooms say, "Hey, CEO, you need to choose one or the other."
Right, exactly.
And then the CEO thinks, oh, I need to choose one or the other. And nobody's there saying, hey, let's think about, is there a possibility that this is a polarity? You have to drive both, but you have to be very clear where you drive one and where you drive the other. And it is worth it. Like, it's, of course, intellectually a little bit more demanding, but the rewards will be 10x. And if that's true, then you should treat it as a polarity. If you treat everything in life as a polarity, you will go nuts because you'll have too many complexities. So you have to use it sparingly. But where you use it, it opens up a whole new world, things that you just couldn't even imagine before. But sorry, I interrupted you there because
not at all. I think that's exactly right on, and I couldn't have said it better myself. Longtime listeners will know one of my pet peeves is people who think that you can put profits over people. But human flourishing and profit are a classic polarity, where if you do one or the other, you're in big trouble. But if you find the synthesis, then you have this incredible unlock.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of things like that in business where it's very easy. The easy path is to pick one or the other, or to do the compromise. We hear people talk about stakeholder capitalism, and to me, it's like the mushiest phrase ever. It's like, well, employees want this, customers want that, investors want. Well, just take a little bit of this, a little bit of that, and we'll mush it together, and it leads to total pablum. Instead, we have to be looking for those synthesis solutions. And what I think is fascinating in my experience, and I want to see if this resonates with you too, when we hold ourselves to that higher standard, What it does is it's more difficult and it's painful, but it often allows some breakthrough new idea to emerge that solves both problems simultaneously, and basically finds it's the way you solve an impossible problem, an irreconcilable problem. Where you say, look, an immovable post is about to be struck by an unstoppable cannonball. What happens? And you're like, actually, and it's like, to me, it's like a warp. A rift in the space-time continuum opens up, and some like truly phenomenal new solution emerges.
Yeah. And I don't even think it's more difficult. I think it is intellectually more complex. But my brain likes it. And when I realize that there's a polarity at play, it relaxes me. Like the worry about the situation goes away, because I'm sitting there saying, geez, I need to make a choice here between two things that I find important. And then when I realize that I can nurture both of them in a particular way, it actually it now makes it easier. But sure, I've been practicing this now for a while, so I sort of love going there.
It takes the fear that one of the things will be lost out of it.
Yeah, and the fear of like betraying principles. So at least for me, like it really can create this angst in me, thinking this is unfair that I have to make this simplistic choice here and sort of kill one baby for the other. And then I realized they are mutually codependent and they need each other, and I need to keep them separate, but I also need to keep them both going. So anyhow, that is a principle I'm following, writing about, talking about. I was so happy to find this. I forget the name of the man who invented polarities, but it made so much sense. And he showed how he uses it as a consultant with different organizations who have what they think are irreconcilable problems, but they aren't.
I like this framework a lot. Of course, I've found it helpful in my own life in many moments, and it's nice to have vocabulary and language to talk about it. But when you were first describing this to me, you talked not only about the inspiration you've taken from these business problems and business domains, but from a book of Finnish poetry. And I have to ask you about it. If you're willing to talk about it, I just thought,
sure.
The conversation, I was like, when you first said that to me, I was like, the conversation is going off the tracks. It's like a total detour, but actually I found it really fascinating. So you mind sharing?
Yeah, so there is this national epos, like this guy who wrote these very patriotic poems about Finland before Finland was an independent country. Like Finland was an essential part of Sweden at the time, but still they were building a national patriotic feeling. So this one is about when there was a war between Russia and Sweden in 1808 to 1809. And it's all about the valiant Finnish soldiers killing everybody, stopping the Russians. It's wonderful to read. But there's one about this Russian general Kulnev, the only one that gives any credit to the enemy. And it's said that he was a general who would fight at daytime, but at night he would go out locally and party with his enemies because they were on enemy soil. And they said, okay, fighting stops at 6 p.m. and then we won't start until next morning. So you could hang out with them in the meantime. And when I was young and read about this, it said, somewhere it says, he will kiss and he will kill with the same warm soul. And I read it, I found it repulsive that somebody could be so heartless. Like, how can you be a military killer and then you also like a warm personality? So it offended me first. And then I started realizing that if I take it out into contextual world, this guy has a job. His job is to be an army general and to kill the enemy. But then he is a human being and he can do both things without compromising the other. I'm not saying they benefited each other like a polarity would do, but there was like a dichotomy that started to make sense. So this was when I was late in my teenage years. And then it started coming back and I like this thing. It's sort of reminding itself, coming up in business thing where I'm thinking back at that one poem, how I read it and how it disturbed me when I was a young man. And then I started realizing that there was some beauty in the expression there that could translate more broadly. So, of course, this is a romantic description of what happened. It's my story and how I came to it. But I realized that that's where I saw this notion of juxtaposition and how it can be useful where you solve really intricate, difficult problems.
Yeah, and it's this is a testament to the power of art. Here you have a poem is not history, so this is not a place to learn about military strategy and effective killing. In fact, it had this imprint on you esoterically over the course of many years, and has led to this really interesting. It's just like it's a fascinating insight, fascinating story. Thank you. Thank you for sharing it.
Yeah.
I think
I'm seeing it in mathematics as well, like back when I studied physics, that in mathematics you do a lot of like reframing the problem. You change from one coordinate system to another, or you have the duality of waves and particles. And they're also like, you look at them and say, it's not just one or the other. It is one where it makes sense and the other where it makes sense. And you have to fully understand the problem. You have to see it as both a wave and a particle, although they seem like they can't agree on the thing, but actually they are both needed.
What's a great example, because it seems like, as far as I could tell, reality is comfortable with these contradictions in a way that the human mind is not.
Yeah, exactly.
We want things to be a certain way, either this or that, and reality is like, well, why choose? Why not both? And
nature is laughing at us for being so simplistic.
We're so rigid. We're so adamant.
What kind of reptiles are we? Yeah, we are reptiles. We can't even think in a more magical way. So anyhow,
I appreciate both the practical nature of that advice, but also the content of it too. I give the credit to Brian Chesky. When I did a conversation like this with him, he told me that the foundation of business is trust and love. And the first time he said that to me, I was like, oh man, just unconditional love at work. And I was like, Brian, what are we talking about? The more I sat with it, the more I thought, I think that's actually true. Like ultimately, that is the motive force underneath it all that makes all of the mechanics of human institutions drives that engine forward. And so we have to attend to that.
I think Brian Chesky is a great example of a business leader who can see the full range and the polarities and drive a very idealistic thought without compromising the business, underlying business reality of it and making it work. So like I admire him. I don't know him, but I admire him from a distance for having this clarity of thought that like Airbnb is still what it was when they started it. Like it hasn't deviated from its great idea.
Yeah. It's an example both of coherence and integrity.
Yeah. Many other companies will give up on their early ideals at some point and say, okay, that was just to get us going in the first 5 to 10 years, but now we're not doing good anymore, or now we're not doing whatever.
That is institutional weakness. That is my claim. We have to stop building companies. I've absolutely had it. I'm with you.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you very much. Like I said, thanks for the work that you did, all those years ago to help me and have helped so many other people. But especially thanks for being so honest and transparent about your experience. I think it's going to help a lot of people.
Thank you, Eric. This was a wonderful conversation. Really enjoyed it.
Likewise. Thanks so much.
Cheers.
You've been listening to The Eric Ries Show. The Eric Ries Show is produced by Jordan Bornstein and Kiki Garthwaite. Research by Tom White and Melanie Rehack. Visual design by Reform Collective. Title theme by DB Music. I'm your host, Eric Ries. Thanks for listening and watching. See you next time.